This is Lopa Nudrin here at Ngakchang Gatsel, our little Dharma center in East Oakland. And I'm here with Julie Rogers today. And Julie's from the Transitional Life Care Organization. And they work on a broad range of issues related to death and dying and post-death care for the spiritual welfare of beings and everything, the realistic ways that we work with, oh, wouldn't you know, phone rings, oh well, that we work with death and dying. And today our topic is going to be loss on the path of awakening, taking personal loss onto the path of awakening. Julie, can you say a little bit more about TLC and what you do and what programs you have coming up? And I'm going to go make sure the phone's okay.
Our program is called TLC Transitional Life Care. Initially, the aspiration was to have a group of people who are trained to some extent and willing to go and help support people when they're in the dying process from a Buddhist or spiritual point of view. And quickly I realized that nobody knew what to do. Thus, we have now this, our 6th year of an educational program going on. So every year we have between 6 and 7 events.
Wow.
We've been having them at Organ Dorje Din Temple in Alameda, California. And we've had a variety of Buddhist lamas, hospice workers, hospice chaplains, MDs, ICU nurses, to get a really well-rounded picture of what people go through when they're dying. And just, I realized just looking at it from a spiritual point of view isn't enough, because we live in this world, in this culture. And in order to have a good death, what we think of as a good death, a calm, a calm event, it's an event. When you're surrounded by loved ones or you have your spiritual wishes addressed, you need to have your secular things in order as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been trying to look at it from different angles, and we also have 2 support groups. One of them is in Ashland, Oregon, and one is in San Francisco, California, called Deep Chat. And the focus is impermanence. It's not necessarily bereavement. It's like, it really opens it up. You can talk endlessly because there's so many events of impermanence, because impermanence is the truth of our lives, And then we also have in Ashland, Oregon, a film series called Teachings of the Masters, and we just show films, and those 2 programs are free. And then also I teach what's called a Transitional Life Forum, centered around our manual, which is called Instructions for the Transitional State, which is currently available through Vimala online, vimalatreasures.org. So we've got a lot of different things going on.
Wonderful.
We have a very small little group of volunteers.
Yeah.
And it's quite an effort to keep going, but, we're working at it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy you're here in the Bay Area. It's such a resource for people that where in the world, who else is doing this work? Not too many people. They're doing pieces of it here and there, but you've really brought it all together under one umbrella.
Well, we're still very small, but as things grow and we can afford to do more, we will.
Yeah.
There are different Dharma centers and Dharma organizations that have end-of-life programs, but I never hear about them.
Yeah.
So usually kind of in-house. This, we're hoping to have it be very ecumenical. It's open to people who are Buddhist, non-Buddhist, different schools of Buddhism. It's just open for everybody.
Yeah.
So
beautiful. Wonderful. So I want to mention also today is Losar, which means New Year. It's the Tibetan New Year. So I'm wearing my jacket that I only bring out. This isn't Tibetan particularly, but it's nice. Bring out my satin jacket once a year on Losar Day, which is a celebratory day in our Buddhist tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. this is a fresh start day. It's very much party atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to a traditional Losar celebration this morning, and I'm feeling good. But that topic actually, in a traditional Buddhist society like Tibet, time, the whole acceptance of impermanence and change is baked into the whole society from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not disowned, so you're not trying to push away some aspect of the process, and I'm thinking of hiding things away, and hospitals, and trying to mortuaries and all of that stuff. But the very cycle of the year is like a death and a rebirth every year. Went through the Gutor period of time, which is this is all according to the lunar calendar as observed in the Tibetan tradition. And Gutor was like, when you come to the end of a year, you want to undo the negativity of that year. So there's many, we would call them magical ceremonies.
Purification practices.
Purification practices. At the end of the year, they're quite forceful.
And I wanted to point out too, in Tibet, particularly the common people of Tibet, witness death all the time.
Yeah.
If they're nomads, they have animals. Mm-hmm. There's birth and death right up in your face as a way of life, where here it's all behind closed doors. And since the funeral industry has taken over in the last 100 years, it's even secreted the whole thing more so.
Yeah.
And people are not willing to discuss it. And that's a whole topic in itself.
Yeah. Bring your volume up.
People are afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course we're afraid of death because we're attached to our lives and our bodies and our families and our stuff.
Yeah.
But there are ways to approach it where it becomes more of an opportunity, really, I think. And that's the Buddhist teachings, and I agree with that. But I think it also requires changing one's mind from the typical distractions that we so heartily involve ourselves in, and entertainments to a more contemplative way of looking at the world. Mm-hmm. So
I remember, I'm not trying to make fun of anyone in their moment of suffering, but I remember I used to be the director of a nursing home. The nursing director. And it was quite a ways back in time. And there was a woman there who herself was 70 something, and her mother was there in her 90s. And she stepped out, the daughter stepped out to have dialysis and then came back. And during that period of time, her mother passed away. And it was like the possibility of her mother dying had never really entered her mind. There was, like, how could this possibly happen to me? And in a way, it's like, maybe that's just a more honest way that she was being than, like most of us wouldn't blurt that out to the nursing home staff who see people die every day, know. But on the other hand, it's genuine, She was just like screaming and crying and said, how could this possibly happen to me? And she's 75 and her mother's 74 and her mother's 90 something. And the social worker and I boxed ourselves into a little room and cracked up. Yeah, I've got to say, you got a little bit of a morbid sense of humor.
Well, I think I used to work as a volunteer for the Ashland Hospice, where I took training. Mm-hmm. And I have never met a more humorous, jovial group of people. And when those folks party, they have a good time. Really great jokes. Anyone who's in a type of work that you're dealing with so much suffering, you resort to humor. It just keeps you sane.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be disrespectful.
Yeah.
no matter how old you are or how old your parents are when they die,
They're always your parents.
you're going to grieve and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be shocked by it.
Yeah.
When my husband died 3 years ago at 79, when I married him, I knew that our time was going to be limited.
Yeah.
And I worried about it every day. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't keep it out of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But when he died, I was totally crushed because, of course, it's a huge loss, But there's not a lot of communication about that
Yeah.
in our culture. And that's a really big problem. And as a Buddhist practitioner, it can be confusing as well because we might think that we're sort of above that type of deep grief, but we're not. We're human. And there's so many different types of losses that people endure. And part of the thing that exacerbates that suffering is how the people around you deal with it or don't deal with it.
Mm.
So, yeah, we were talking earlier about how for instance, tribal cultures, when there's a loss or a death, you're still living with your family. You're surrounded by a community, and in our culture, that just isn't the case anymore all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of isolation for people who are in extreme pain, and it just makes the pain worse.
Yeah, that's really true. It's not a family experience for a lot of us anymore because we are very far from our families, or we had very small families, and we're like, I'm the only one left other than my brother. My brother and I are just two left in our immediate family.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking I usually do the 3 rounds of meditation during each hour we spend together. You guys, if you have any questions, you can put them over there in the chat box, and Julie or I will answer them best we can. We're just regular people here. You may have your own answers also, and you could share them with us as well. So first of all, I think let's do some. If you've been with us for other sessions, you know that we practice shamatha here. Shamatha is a kind of the most basic form of meditation where we're basically relaxing. And the way that we relax is by, with a gentle touch, bringing our attention back to something over and over again. When it wanders, bring our attention back. And that way we get little windows, puffs of openness. I claim that there's a little bit of subtle joy there. and gradually, if we adopt meditation in our lives, that a bright, open, clear quality can come forth by sort of shining through these windows in our mind, so we don't have so much debris clogging up our consciousness all the time. So I'm going to sit up straight, and we're going to just do a couple minutes of maybe 5, maybe 2, maybe 5 of shamatha practice, or calming meditation. And so if we haven't been with us before, the way we're doing it is bringing our attention back to the out-breath. Your mind is always active and it'll always wander. Some people focus on this style of practice for many years. It isn't our way so much in our Tibetan tradition to keep focusing on this kind of structure of bringing it back, not forcefully, but intentionally bringing it back again and again. But we do it as part of our training. What was I going with that? I don't know. But some people who really focus on this shamatha, they get very, very into very, very thought-free states for more extended periods of time.
Which would really be beneficial if you're going through some kind of loss.
Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I do. I think
right in the middle of it?
Yeah, I think it just depends on how you're feeling because it's very much a roller coaster. And the mind will not allow you, from my understanding and my experience, the mind will not allow you to just continuously suffer. It's like there's a denial factor that comes in, or I don't know what to describe it as. There's a brain fog too, where sometimes you're just spaced out. Yeah. It's hard to think. It's hard to remember things. It's, but I think that's sort of a safety mechanism of the
Mm-hmm.
mind,
Mm-hmm.
because you're in such shock.
Yeah.
It's a shock.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do think you can practice these things sometimes. It just depends on how you're feeling right then.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see what we can do. Let's start. And as I've said before, if you want to calm down from a hard day or a stressful day or just a very active, mentally active day, bring your gaze a little bit down, and then soft focus on the out breath, the feeling of where your breath goes out, either at your lips or in your mouth. Some people focus on where the breath passes through their lungs, doesn't matter so much. Use that as a cue. So eventually, when your thoughts wander and you feel yourself, oh, wow, I was thinking, just very gently bring your attention back and put it nicely onto that out breath again. You don't have to worry so much about the in breath coming in and stuff like that. So I find a short sessions often are good throughout one's life, whether you're a hotshot practitioner of some kind. I wouldn't know about that kind of person, but because I'm just an ordinary person. But whether you're beginner, beginning, or middle, or end of your time with spiritual practice, that even a couple of minutes can, if you can intersperse it, like in those windows when the grief is let up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And grief is really exhausting. And I feel that something's not, I haven't seen addressed very well. And the Buddha taught impermanence as one of the major points of facing reality. He was a big no BS kind of guy. He wanted the reality of birth, old age, sickness, and death happening to all of us was is a fundamental part of Buddhist doctrine. The soft side of grieving and mourning and so forth. The story I remember is when a woman was the baby, you know. Correct me if I'm wrong. The story is she's a woman's baby dies, and she goes to the Buddha bereft, and
carrying this dead child.
Carrying the dead child, and he says, "Well, go around town, and here's what you need to do." I think she was thinking it might bring him. The Buddha might bring the baby back to life. Go around to each household in town and ask them, find a house where they've not lost anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody's died. And it was a kind of idea that if she found one, then maybe he'd bring the baby back to life.
I don't remember that part of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the reward was supposed to be.
I think when people are grieving and bereft, it's not what I would call the most balanced mind state. Your rug's been pulled out.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining that her view was that, how could this happen to me?
Yeah.
Where I think through the process of going from house to house and finding that every single person had lost someone in their life, it changed her perspective so that it wasn't so focused on herself as an individual. And a lot of the suffering is from that self-fixation.
Yeah.
And of course, she's still grieving her child. She still grieved her child, and I can't imagine a worse loss. But I think it brought things into perspective for her. You know, and it's the only story I've ever heard about bereavement in Buddhist thought.
Oh, yeah, she's so young.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And another too, actually, I remember reading the book Born in Tibet by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And when his guru dies, he's absolutely inconsolable. Yeah. And in the story of Marpa, when Marpa's son dies, he's also inconsolable.
Yeah.
And it said in that story, how can you feel this way? You're the great Marpa. You're a realized being. And he said, well, this is super reality. Something along those lines. Because every person, especially if you have children or parents, everyone grieves. It's just natural. Yeah. Unless you really are realized. And that's something I can't address because I'm not.
But I have seen realized people totally displaying the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. Hi, Lori. Just like right out of the book, I would say, for example, Lama Tarchin Rinpoche, I don't think he would mind me saying this, that because it was the truth. When Dongse Tenla Norpa Rinpoche died, his teacher, in the Tibetan Buddhist framework, we don't use the word died, because these great lamas are emanations for our benefit, and they kind of like they're withdrawing the emanation that they generated for us. But in any event, we could see all those stages, and it wasn't short. 6 months later, he was still showing signs of deep grief.
I remember Rinpoche crying when he'd even mentioned Tenla Norpa Rinpoche.
Yeah.
because it's such a great loss.
Yeah. It's I've got to say it was such a great loss. I mean, now we've lost, for me, my experience of loss in the last few years, last 10 years, has been losing these great old yogis, our teachers
Yeah.
from Tibet, who were trained inside of Tibet or in the border country, in that uncorrupted generation. And, just in a way that we may not see happen again.
Yeah.
And that's been heartbreaking.
Yes. The last time I saw Lama Pema Dorje Rinpoche, which was here, um, he was very humbly sitting on the ground outside in the backyard, and
Yeah.
I went over. I wanted to talk with him about our program, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and he told me a story that was really terrific, and he laughed through the whole thing, the
Yeah.
telling of it, about a woman whose husband had died, and the last thing that he said to her was, "I'll be back."
Mm.
So she had a coffin built for him that had a window over his face, so she could look in every day. She'd look down into the casket,
Wow.
waiting for him to come back to life and wake up.
Yeah.
And Rinpoche was just chuckling and chuckling and chuckling.
Yes.
And days went by, and so she's watching his body decompose, basically. And finally, she had to realize that there wasn't going to be a miracle. This is one of the basic, most fundamental aspects of life, is death.
Yeah.
And that was a big teaching for her.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of strangely comical.
But Rinpoche had a very dark sense of humor. And I remember trying to explain to a new translator for him, who later just totally came to love him a lot. She said, he said da 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 da, and then he died, and then he started to laugh. What was that? And I said, that was a joke. That was a Tibetan style joke. And a lot of the lamas are like that.
Yeah.
Because they're so accepting. I don't know how to put it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They've faced facts about impermanence, and so a lot of you'll you'll hear them talking in Tibetan, it'll be da 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 da, and then he died.
Well, the irony of it, too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a mind-bending experience. Death. There's nothing you can do. You have no control.
Yeah.
We spend our lives trying to be in control.
Yeah.
And this is the one thing that everybody's kind of leveled to a common denominator.
Yeah.
So we have this in common. It's the thing we have in common more than anything else, and it's the thing we avoid more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very strange dichotomy there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that I feel like, oh, I'm going to die. That's great. I'm going to be,
Yeah.
But, I'm nervous about it just like anyone else, because I feel like I still need things I need to take care of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the point of a lot of it, is preparing yourself.
Yeah.
On every level, not just emotionally or psychologically, spiritually, physically, giving away your things. I love this Tibetan tradition. When someone knows they're going to die, they give away all of their things. And, preparing your family, talking to your family. This is the biggest hole we have in this whole process, is people are so afraid to talk about it with their families. And writing down your wishes, so that when you've died, the family doesn't have to go through all this incredibly disheveling discomfort of trying to decide what to do and how to do it, and the squabbles. People are at their worst. And so there's a lot of really positive preparation that can actually bring you closer to your people in the process.
Yeah. I want to go back for a moment to this woman going around to all the houses. Because I kind of earlier, maybe when we were preparing, we were talking a little bit about how for you and I, the Bodhisattva intention really gives us the strength at these horrible times.
Yeah.
And Bodhisattva, you may remember from previous times that we've talked, is this altruistic intention, first of all, you have equal concern for all living beings, no playing favorites. And this is where we really, Buddhism really, there's not hardly any religions that really have much of that, that's, you rarely hear of that. Maybe the Quakers, I don't know. Maybe
I don't
some others
know.
do. I don't know all the world religions.
Jesus
Can't
is
say.
Jesus. Christianity is such a
Vast.
yeah, and
Mhm.
do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's
Right.
called equanimity,
Right.
which is part of the bodhicitta aspiration.
Right. So this bodhisattva intention is actually the best thing we can do for sentient beings. It means living beings with a mind, is to completely wake up spiritually,
Mhm.
and then we can really be a benefit. Because until that time, we're what we're doing and we're saying and so forth is colored by subconscious self-interest a lot of the times, maybe like all the time, and we never really know if we're really being, even if it looks like we're being of help, we don't really know because we can't see the future, we can't see their next life, we can't really see how we're really, the ultimate benefit is attaining awakening. So at these moments of loss, I wanted to I find there's a many fancy practices in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that can be done by religious specialists or be done by the family and so forth. But oftentimes in our society, we're alone. And it is, for example, there's a practice, a sur, which I've taught for your group before, where you're burning during the time, we believe that during the time after passing, the when there's a
Like the consciousness.
the consciousness is disembodied, it may not be aware that it's past, and it may be hanging around the family and so forth and not know that its time is done, and wondering why, when they're having dinner, why aren't you making dinner for me, and why can't you hear me, and what's going on here, and it's a very soothing thing for them that really helps them wake up to their reality, and is we kind of inside, burning is never sounds very appealing, but kind of incinerating, how we're going to say, we're roasting some beautifully smelling food for them and dedicating that to them specifically. And,
particularly in sudden deaths.
Yes, particularly in sudden deaths.
It's really a very positive, helpful practice to do.
Yeah, so it's not hard to do.
No,
but when you're
simple.
grieving, it's like if for example, when my father died, I tried to do it every day for a while, then once a week for a while. It was so difficult because it's so exhausting when you're grieving, and you're in our society, you're pretty much alone with it. So it'd be better if we could do these practices for each other's relatives, and but we're not in a family or tribal situation here generally.
No.
So, and particularly not Buddhist, where or whatever your framework is, we're not all sharing the same spiritual framework. So sometimes that doesn't work either.
No, just even any kind of prayer and contemplation and meditation can be shared by everyone, no matter what their spiritual path is. And we could get together and just do that and support the person who's dealing with the loss. That would be the simplest and most forthright way. A lot of times what the bereaved person really needs somebody to listen. And I've heard so many times in my own experience, well, I didn't call you because I didn't know what to say. That is an understandable and really inadequate reason to back away or shy away from someone who's bereaved. Because all they need to know is that you care about them, they need someone to talk to, and they need to be heard. And it might seem like a very sad thing to have to do that, but what you're doing for the person who's going through this terrible loss is really, it's wordlessly wonderful. There's no way to describe that kind of support.
Yeah.
And anyone who's got a good heart wants to offer some kind of support and they don't really know how to do it. Yeah, you can bring over food, but what the person who's bereaved needs is companionship,
Mm-hmm.
you know, especially if you're isolating in the home, particularly if it's the home where you lived with a spouse or a child
Mm-hmm.
or a family member. It's like living inside of a ghost's mind. It's very difficult.
What comes to mind for me is that in our urban Oakland society, my world, I have a lot of people that are kind of in between. They're not close and they're not far. That emotionally, I don't. I as a person who might be an acquaintance, rather than a
Mhm.
close friend, and yet you never know whether you're the only person who's willing to step in at that moment.
Mhm.
And so it's a little feels awkward, and sometimes in that awkwardness I shy away for that reason. I mean, not with a close friend,
Mhm.
but kind of it's hard to know what to do with those
Well,
acquaintances.
sharing something like this can result in closer friendships.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Particularly what happens is a sense of trust is developed.
Mm,
And when you have a huge loss, particularly a shocking one, your trust in phenomena in in the world is undermined.
mhm,
And you also lose aspects of yourself because we identify so much with people who we love.
mhm,
When they're gone, it's like we're lost,
mm,
you know? And so just to be there and be a companion or come over and say, spend some time or get out for a walk, anything
mhm,
like that
mhm,
is really, really helpful and a wonderful practice.
mhm.
It's definitely a practice of generosity.
Yeah. And generosity is one of the 6 practices of bodhisattvas.
Yeah.
So, Julie, I wonder if you could, what I find useful the most when I'm in crisis with anything, everything's, so many things we've touched on death, but there's so many mini losses going on all the time
Yeah.
that I'm having to rebound from shocking things quite often in my life. Even I have a fairly protected life.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I find is Tonglen, the sending and taking practice, is really something because you don't need any equipment for it. You can
No,
do it in
it's
for a minute, you can do it for 15 seconds, and maybe that's all the attention span and energy you have at those harsh times.
yeah, I am a huge fan of Tonglen practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in Buddhism, often there are initiations or transmissions or empowerments that you need, and for this, you do not.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what your religion is or if you have one at all.
Mm-hmm.
You can practice it anywhere, anytime, with by yourself or for another person. Um, you could be standing on a corner watching someone who's crying across the street and do
Mm-hmm.
it for them,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And it's really helpful for oneself because often I think we ignore our own suffering. We build such thick walls around ourselves in order to maintain, in order to keep going, in order to, function in the world. And we carry a lot of pain. And it really impacts our relationships with others and with ourselves. And you can do Tonglen just for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have some kind of intimacy with ourselves, how are we going to have intimacy with others?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And the Tonglen practice is very simple. You visualize breathing in the suffering or negativity or obstacles, obstructions that another person experiences on the in breath. And when you breathe out all your qualities, all the benefits that you enjoy in your own life, your virtues, love, compassion, awareness. And you just do this practice, visualizing white light when you're breathing out into the other person, and a dark light sounds contradictive, but like a smoke, like a smoky um, sort of substance, if you will. And you can do this for yourself and then widen it out Typically, and in Vajrayana tradition, you do it sometimes for your mother, first of all, and then you widen it out to your family, and then your community, and then the entire world. And it is very heart opening. That's the wonder. That's the wonder of it. How it puts us in touch with our genuine bodhicitta, but loving kindness, our kindness, and our empathy, and our ability to feel for others. And then you find that you're actually more concerned for others, and it helps to what's the word, dissipate or purify selfishness and self-grasping, which is the cause for attachment, which is the cause for suffering. So it's a very, very powerful practice. It's really, really simple.
Yeah. I think, for me, I do it for me. So I start with myself,
Yeah.
I've got to say. And because when I'm in agony, there's really nowhere else to start.
Yeah.
And then I physically imagine, this is the way, there's a lot of different descriptions of Tonglen practice. But I kind of, when I'm, for example, feel like there's a knife in my heart from some terrible loss, I will think, well, are there other people in this neighborhood who have a knife in their hearts from a terrible loss right now? You bet there are.
Mm-hmm.
And in this nation, in this world, and the whole universe. And then and there is a sense, first when you hear the statement, oh, may I take on the suffering of all sentient beings, it sounds like, well, I couldn't do that. But really, it then more if you do it, it kind of makes sense in some way, because to bring all of it into yourself, you've gained a sense of purpose, for one thing.
Yes. I just this last year, Khenpo's Paljor Gyatso, who's one of the wonderful teachers that's taught for TLC, agreed to present a teaching at the UCSF Cancer Center in San Francisco. And the woman who helped us organize this, her first question is, why would we want to ask cancer patients to take on the suffering of others? They're already suffering enough. And so there was this kind of fear that if I visualize bringing your suffering into myself, somehow that's going to harm me. And part of the visualization too is once you've inhaled this, visualized dark, smoky appearance or substance, it dissolves into your heart. It's dissipated. It's resolved. So it's not like you're going to be taking on this thing that you're going to carry around with you. And when Khenpo was explaining it to the group, he discussed this. It really is one of the most heart-opening, transformative practices that I've done in Buddhism. And that's why it's part of when you are a Buddhist and you practice, for instance, the preliminary practices, you take refuge. And the next thing is the bodhicitta practice. I'm sure you've talked about this. The Tonglen practice is enveloped in that bodhicitta practice. It's the kind of physical thing you do as opposed to the contemplation of loving kindness. The Tonglen is the thing that you can actually practice that really does open your heart, really does take you out of being stuck in yourself, and really can benefit other people.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Right now. So just want you just one more time remind people just the key points as they start.
So when you get settled, and it's good to, you can look straight ahead, you can lower your eyes. I suppose you can close your eyes, but I think in Vajrayana Buddhism there's a relationship with light and being awake. And you just allow yourself to relax, and then as you breathe out, sometimes it's suggested that you breathe out one nostril and breathe in the other. Breathe out the right nostril, breathe in the left nostril. But as you breathe out, you send all the virtue, the merit, the benefits that you've experienced, your heart, your love, and you send that out into, if it's someone else, you visualize them in front of you. If it's for yourself, you just imagine that you're receiving this yourself. And then you inhale, and as a dark smoke, you take into yourself the pain, the suffering, obstacles, difficulties, and bring them in, and they dissolve inside of you. And you just do that very calmly. And if you lose your focus, you just return to it. It's a very undemanding process.
Mm.
The other thing I'd like to say about Tonglen and loss,
Mm.
even for myself as well, when my husband died 3 years ago, it was sudden. And despite his age, I was in deep shock. And we also had been living on his Social Security and that ended the next day. So I lost my income. And I spent a lot of time just working. Is almost like a way to distract myself and avoid my grieving process.
Mm.
I mean, I had to do it, but I worked so hard, and one can become very rigid in terms of self protection from grief. And the Tonglen practice breaks down that wall between yourself and yourself.
Mm.
And very, very helpful. We like to avoid crying, we like to avoid feeling how we feel. But if you don't feel how you feel, if you avoid it, generally, and I learned this in bereavement training too, you will become physically ill. And I did. And part of it was that I was alone and I was having a hard time grieving by myself. Part of it is it was so incredibly painful that I would try to avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it was that I had to do all these things just to keep my boat floating. And I know that when I was able to practice, and this is a perfect practice for this because it doesn't take any special anything. You don't even need a liturgy. You don't need to have memorized anything. There's nothing to it, but it can help break down that distance that we put between ourselves and our pain. And we need to feel that pain. And it's the door to freedom, really. It's the door to compassion. So I think that, for those of us, for all of us who will experience major losses in our lives, it's good to keep this in mind. So I just wanted to say that.
So looking back on it, as the loss of your husband in general, do you think do you feel more spiritually awake now than before, the same, or in a worse state than before he passed? That's a very personal question. You don't have to
So
answer.
no, it's okay. I can't. A friend of mine who was a Zen priest said to me once, "You can never judge your own training," which I think was very wise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worse off. I mean, the first year after David died, I was in a fog. I was really a basket case.
Mm-hmm.
The second year, it got a little easier. I would just kind of went across the threshold when he had his third death anniversary on New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I am more aware of myself. I am more, because I had to go through this really dark tunnel to get here, I feel wiser for it, I think. Not that I was, I'm not going on about myself, but I just feel like I'm more equipped to deal with things because it's like when the worst thing that you can imagine happens, there are worse things than losing your husband. If it, like they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think it's allowed me to be more compassionate. I have more empathy. I'm more willing to be open. I mean, I've always been pretty open, but it that I guess is the benefits of weathering a storm and coming out the other side of it. You're different. I feel like a different person. So yeah, I think ultimately I'm better off than I was beforehand. And because I also work as a writing coach with elders, I designed a class I was telling Yudrin about earlier called Gaining Through Loss, where it's a writing class where people look into some loss they've had and really, really examine it and see if they can glean something positive that actually came from it. And a lot of it, I think, is being stronger, being a stronger person and being more available. And I know that some people will withdraw through because of a death and never come back out, and that's a real tragedy.
Mhm.
because life is there, and what we do with it is really important.
For me, it just really being aware of impermanence really increases the urgency of
Yeah.
helping people,
Yes.
and the best helping you can do is sharing the Dharma, not pushing it down people's throats,
Mhm.
but help this kind of Dharma that helps.
Mhm.
Um, the Dharma, the Buddha wanted to help suffering.
Yeah.
That was like the key idea, and sometimes I think we forget that, and that our
Yeah.
real lives, our real suffering, what was meant to be addressed by all of this meditation, spiritual
Oh, and the different
teachings.
methods of Buddhism are there to help us resolve suffering.
Yeah. So I thought we got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to talk about you know, the use of mantras. And mantra is like a little phrase or incantation that is done, that is comes to us from India. We think of it as each one is coming from the Buddha. And the most famous of these is the mantra of compassion, Om Mani Padme Hum, or Om Mani Padme Hum, as the Tibetans often say. And this mantra is the most every Tibetan person, every Bhutanese person, every borderland person, uh, says this mantra, the mantra of the Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, also known as Chenrezig. But inherent, sound and words inherently shape our neuroendocrine system, I believe.
Mhm.
And whether we're saying them loudly, softly, or barely, um, attuning, we're attuning our mind to compassion when we're saying the mani. There's many, many mantras in the Tibetan tradition. There's also, in Tara.
Mhm.
And the mani is not considered something you must have gone through a ceremony and been initiated and so forth into this practice. It's very good if you have. But every time if you're like anything, all these shamatha practices, if you bring your attention back, if you're aware of what you're doing, that's great. If you're not aware of what you're doing while you're saying, if you lose your attention, of course you do, as you're going about your day, you're saying Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, and then you forget and you become unmindful and distracted, then suddenly you hear yourself saying Om Mani Padme Hum, and that reminds you to naturally come back to your practice of fostering compassion. And
Mhm.
compassion and the wisdom of compassion and the touching the experience of emptiness, these are the two main components, raising these up on the path to awakening. And Lama Tarchen Rinpoche, one of my dear teachers, said it can go either way. You can practice on the emptiness side, where you're sitting, you're resting, and meditation and so forth, or you can practice the compassion side, and it'll bring the emptiness side up. So the emptiness side will naturally bring up the compassion side, and the compassion side will naturally bring up the emptiness side. So Tibetans throughout the world say this like all day long, and they are, I must say, of course they're human beings, and there's all kinds of human beings in Tibetan society, but I've met people who have never learned a word of Dharma, barely, like formally, um, who are Tibetan, who are the most generous, kind people,
Mhm.
and all they know is the mani.
Mhm.
So let's I find when I'm hurting that I kind of, in a way, it's kind of like combining Tonglen and Mani. I I broaden my concern for all living beings equally, and I say the Mani, or the Mani means jewel, on the, and you can just keep saying it going on your out breath, and then when breathing in, you can say it on that too, as you know. And so, in a way, it becomes so Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. I've done so much Tonglen, it automatically broadens my concern, I find. You know, and I think, and I have this, I kind of horizontal from having done our, you know, preliminary practices in our tradition. I have a sense of these, all the animals and the humans arrayed out on horizontally throughout space, and so it's not so much that I'm practicing. You can do the Mani practice for the person who's passed, for sure, but also if you're sunk down into that well of darkness, it brings you up and opens everything up, opens up that heart, and you rejoin the bigger picture.
And also, when doing practices or any type of Buddhist practice, we always precede our practice with what we call refuge, and the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And we always dedicate the merit of our practice to all beings throughout space. And this is kind of a way to seal it, signed, sealed, and delivered.
That's right.
It's very important because our intention, which is what we approach the practice with, and our ability to offer it up are part of that heart opening method.
We have to uplift our lives. You know, in Bhutanese, in Thimphu, Bhutan, they have a stupa called the Memorial Stupa. It's like a Chorten stupa means it's actually a reliquary. There's relics of the Buddha in there. There's holy texts and so forth. And there's kind of this monument.
It's a symbol of enlightenment.
Symbol of enlightenment. And you go before dawn, and hundreds of Bhutanese people are out there going around saying the Mani. Going around saying the Mani. And likewise in Dharamsala, India, where the Dalai Lama lives, hundreds, if not thousands of people are out there before dawn, before they go to work, going around the Dalai Lama's temple and monastery.
Yeah, and same in Bodh Gaya, around the stupa there.
Right. We have a lot of, some wonderful stupas here. But I sometimes will go to ODD and walk around the block, or Gindurja Den, where they do a lot of their events. But in any event, wherever you're going, walking, standing, sitting, lying down, you can always say the Mani or practice Tonglen. So let's just say we have to close. We're a little bit over, but I want to just say some Manis for a minute and try to say Om Mani Padme Hum on your out breath, and then also on your in breath, and just keep going with it for like a minute. And think with compassion of all sentient beings suffering in cyclic existence. So in this way, the path of suffering as a sentient being and the path of becoming a real bodhisattva are united in our hardest moments. And in a way, they become more powerful.
Yeah.
I feel.
Transformative.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us. Hey, Lori. Hey, you're welcome. And we really appreciate you joining us. And everybody who's watching later, go to the TLC website.
Oh, tlcserves.org. We're actually going to have a brand new website in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're very excited. We have a lot of information on our current one, but it's a little archaic, as you'll see if you check it out. And we both dedicate our merit to the benefit of all beings.
That's right. All righty. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
We'll have you back sometime.
Okay.
All righty.
All right. Good night.
Good night, everybody.